Okay, so this is my initial review on the Canon EOS R5. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone who has subscribed to my channel. I really think I'm going to be able to hit my goal of getting to 1,000 subscribers within the next 2 months. I hope you guys are enjoying this content, and above all else, I hope you're actually finding it helpful. So overall, with the Canon EOS R5, I'm actually having a lot more fun with this camera than on the R6. Even though the differences aren't that drastic, there's still some almost seemingly untangible qualities of the R5 that make it more fun to shoot with. But I think like some of the more obvious concrete things that come to the forefront of my mind in terms of why this camera might be more enjoyable to use are obviously the higher resolution sensor. It's a lot more fun to play around with these files during the post-editing process, especially shooting with the RF lenses. Like I said, I have the 15-35, the 50mm 1.2 and the 85mm 1.2. I really have a new appreciation for these lenses paired with this higher resolution body. The flexibility that you get with the sensor in terms of editing your photos and adjusting the colors, working with the dynamic range, and also cropping into your photo with all of that detail that you're getting from the RF lenses is absolutely amazing. And what's really cool is even though you're getting the same in-body image stabilization on the R6 as on the R5, I feel like it's more important to have on the R5 just because you are working with those higher resolution photos. So things like camera shake and shutter shock from the mechanical shutter, and just not having a fast enough shutter speed for the scene that you're shooting are less of an issue with the in-body image stabilization on the R5. I think some other reasons why I'm really enjoying using this camera over the R6 are the upgraded EVF and the LCD screen. So there was a short period where I still had my R6 after I got my R5. I did do a side-by-side comparison of the EVF and the LCD screen on both of those cameras, and I could definitely tell a difference between the two, and it really does make it so much more enjoyable to use the R5 in real world situations. And it's also helpful with the little things like using the magnify feature to check focus. Even that is a lot easier to use when you're looking at a higher resolution viewfinder and LCD screen. And it's always nice to show the clients a picture on the back of your camera screen with the higher resolution LCD. So in terms of paid photography gigs, I used this on a couple of sessions so far. I had a family session, and I also used it to capture some behind the scenes footage for a video project. So honestly, for family sessions, this camera is overkill. I keep this camera set to continuous high with the high speed display mode enabled so that I don't get any of that blackout and I can really see where my subjects are moving, especially with running kids. It's a lot easier to track with that high speed display enabled. Now, just because it's overkill doesn't mean that it's not really nice to have this camera for family sessions. Like I said, I'm frequently showing my clients some of the pictures on the back of the camera screen, and when they can see that really crisp and clear and high resolution photo on the screen, I think that can really lend itself to getting the clients excited about the session. So of course, having the extra ability to crop into your photo is really nice. It's not necessary because I usually always make sure to focus on my composition in camera, but that being said, I do think it's nice that you could do things like change up the aspect ratio of the photo, or if you shot a horizontal, you could change it into a vertical orientation, and that's helpful for clients that like to make albums and also print, especially large. Having that flexibility for them is nice because sometimes you end up with a bunch of photos that look similar, so it is nice to add some variety for the client. So another example of when the Canon EOS R5 came in handy is when I was taking behind the scenes photos for a video project, and it was really nice having an electronic shutter that I could actually rely on. When I'd use it on the Canon EOS R6, the rolling shutter was so bad because the sensor readout speed is a lot slower on the R6. On the R5, since the sensor readout speed is faster, it is a lot more usable, and it's a really nice feature, especially on a video set where you have to be quiet because you don't want to add any noise into the environment. And obviously this will be a very handy feature for event photography and weddings, especially if you're shooting inside a quiet church. Another little thing from my perspective is that the added weight of the camera body hasn't been an issue for me at all. Personally, I don't mind the camera body being a little bit heavier. Even with a lens like the RF85 1.2, I really didn't mind the weight. Another feature that I've really been enjoying on this camera is the ability to set the multifunction button to switch from photo mode to video mode or vice versa. It makes this camera so much more useful when you're actually out in the field using it, and to be able to switch from those two modes on the fly is really invaluable. And that kind of leads me into the next point, in which a lot of people have covered already, and that is that on the Canon EOS R5 you can set custom video modes. I'm not really going to go into depth on that subject, but just know that it is really useful if you are a hybrid shooter. I feel like it would have made a lot of sense for them to add that feature onto the R6, since it's also a great video camera that has amazing 4K, especially the 4K 60 on that camera. But I guess that they just needed one more thing to make the Canon EOS R5 more appealing. So on the video side of things, I've been really enjoying the image quality that comes out of this camera. I've used everything from 4K 24 frames per second up to 4K 120 frames per second, and I can say that it is all really nice. I do wish that the 4K 60 was as good as it is on the R6. You can definitely tell it's a little bit muddier and not as detailed, but to me that's okay, because if you add a little bit of sharpening, you really almost can't even tell that from the 4K HQ that the Canon EOS R5 shoots. You can also tell that the 4K 120 frames per second also takes a hit on the quality since it's not being downsampled. But again, comparing it to the 1080p 120 frames per second on the EOS R6, I do think that there is a big jump in quality. In terms of overheating, I haven't experienced it yet, and just like my R6, I have been using this camera mainly with the Ninja V. What that does is it allows me to get around those really hard to work with codecs on the R5. I think it's the H.265 codec, and I can just record in ProRes, and those files are so much easier to work with. I can also just use the large capacity SSD units that I have. I have two 500 gigabyte SSDs, so it is really nice using the Atomos with this camera, and you also avoid the overheating a little bit more than if you were to shoot internally with the Canon EOS R5. I believe at 4K 60 there's actually no overheating if you are using an external monitor to record. I had been going back and forth on adding the C70 to my arsenal, but I do think I'm going to hold off on that just because I do think I can use the EOS R5 for a lot of the work that I think I'm going to be doing within the next year or two. And for longer video segments, which, you know, I'd usually be more hesitant to use it because of the overheating, I probably just stick the R5 into the 4K crop mode and still get a really nice picture, but I won't have to worry about the overheating. One more feature that I appreciate with the Atomos Ninja 5 with the R5 is that you can dual record on the external monitor and within the camera. If you were just using the R5, you can dual record, but it has to be when shooting 8K RAW, so that's a kind of a pain, and you know, to me it's really limited just because of the overheating issue. So like I said, my overall impressions for the R5 have been really positive. To me, it is much more fun to use than the Canon EOS R6. And you know, ideally I want to be having a lot of fun using the camera. That's why I got into photography in the first place. you know, while I'm interested in always, you know, perfecting the craft, you know, focusing a little bit on the gear and making sure that you're having fun isn't a bad thing. Some things that I noticed that I have to be mindful of with this camera is, of course, the storage limit and the large file sizes. So even on my 128 gigabyte CF Express card, you know, if I'm not shooting compressed RAW or the C RAW, then I find myself being really mindful of, you know, how many pictures I'm taking, and I'm usually not sticking the camera in continuous high plus. And overall, that's not a bad thing because it also cuts down on that culling process during the post editing. I mean, you really should be super mindful of when you're actually pressing the shutter button on a camera. So one thing I wish the Canon EOS R5 could do is shoot a time-lapse video while using C-Log, so you could color grade it and match it with the rest of your footage in post. But, you know, that's not the biggest deal. And the last thing about this camera that I think that potential buyers should know is that, and you probably already do know this, but just to reiterate, you can definitely expect these files to be harder on your computer. So if you don't have a very capable computer, you can expect your general workflow to be slowed down pretty significantly. I have a decent computer. I think it's a 2016 MacBook Pro. For photo editing, I did experience a slowdown, and it is to the point where I think I might start using the smart previews in Lightroom, but you know, it hasn't been harder to work with the ProRes files even when I'm shooting high quality 4K. But one thing I did realize is that I can't edit 8K or import 8K files into Final Cut because of my computer limitations. It's not the biggest deal, but if you plan to shoot 8K and use that 8K RAW feature, then definitely keep that in mind. Alright, so that is it for today. If you guys have any questions about the Canon EOS R5 or the R6, then leave me a comment below and I will talk to you later. See ya.